So I don't know if you noticed in the second reading, I decided to change God to the pronouns they. So in the future, I'm going to try to make a concerted effort to like the he, using he and she just gets to be a little bit too cumbersome. So they kind of hits the spot, I think. So anyway, when I was back in high school, my senior religion teacher's name was Sister Mary of the Holy Rosary. And since we were kids and we did what kids do, we just shortened that to Beads, B-E-A-D-S. Something she once let on to us that she actually knew we called her that. So Beads was not one of my favorite teachers after she delivered an impassioned speech urging us to rat out our classmates who might be secretly pregnant since they had changed their, what she called, state in life to something other than student and consequently no longer belonged in school. She also had a girl named Christine removed from class after the girl questioned her theology in front of everybody. So the term stage in life is an artifact of a static universe where nothing ever changes. It once put you in your place for you and everyone else to see, even if that place might not have served you all that well. So thank God, state in life no longer matters like it once did. But the term once made for a great categorization of people, even if it meant putting round pegs into square holes and making a lot of folks quite unhappy. So why couldn't you be a working mother, a priest and married, a stay-at-home father? Why couldn't that be? But one of the many beauties of modern life is that many people are able to change their state in life and they reinvent themselves, sometimes several times. I think there are quite a few of us sitting here who have reinvented ourselves several times. And we can also occupy various planes of existence, something that wasn't really available to people back in the day. So this is also true of institutions. Institutions change even as they remain the same. And prophets dream dreams, as Carol said last week, opening up a vista which previous generations just might not have had the eyes to see. And thus the pipe dreams of prophets eventually become policies as movements gather steam and move from the realm of the impossible to becoming quite commonplace. So since many new people have joined us on Zoom during the pandemic, I thought it might be useful to give a brief and partial history on how the community of St. Mary Magdalene invented itself as it spun off an institution that closed its ranks against vision and unwanted prophecy. And as I said earlier, we can continue that discussion after Mass if you want. So it is important to know that one of the things that defines our community is our commitment to charity. As Ed Burt mentions each week, where the food that our community donates to Anna's Place or to whatever charitable institution he can find, I often think of one of our beloved dead, Bud Englert, Cass's late husband, who gave hospitality and generosity wings many years ago. Bud was once the pastor of a once stodgy Philadelphia parish called St. Vincent de Paul. The congregation was dwindling due to white flight and deeply embedded racism in the city of Philadelphia. The parishioners were largely uninterested in much of anything except fulfilling their Sunday obligation to attend Mass. Bud changed all that when God called his name and baptized him into the role of prophet. And when he became the pastor, it was as if flocks of doves flew through everyone's heart. Under Bud, all sorts, I see Jim Plastaris nodding his head because he knows. Under Bud, all sorts of wonderful things began to happen. He preached every single Sunday that God loved them. He said that those who follow Jesus should share their largesse with others, something that often didn't happen in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, where obedience and donations to the church were of primary importance. People began flocking to the church from far away. Ministries blossomed. One couple established a soup kitchen. From there grew a food pantry, clothing distribution, a nurses and a legal clinic, all begun and staffed by volunteers dedicated to the vision of Jesus, who stated that his mission was to heal the brokenhearted. Bud's vision changed the face of the parish and its outreach to the community which had become largely poor and Black. 2 incorporated charities grew out of Bud's vision: Face to Face, which now runs the soup kitchen, which feeds people 5 days a week, and the health clinic and the legal clinic. And another organization called Indwelling, which tutors students and helps them get into prestigious schools and colleges, and also helps people find homes. Someone had the foresight to incorporate them separately from the parish some 20 years ago, so the Archdiocese would not receive a cut of the now plentiful and large corporate donations. When our family began attending St. Vincent's in 1986, Bud had already left the parish and the priesthood, reinventing himself as a loving husband to Cass and a foster father to many. If my memory serves me correctly, the parishioners actually had to buy him a suit because he had none. For years after his departure, parishioners referred to Bud in awe and in loving terms. Bud had almost single-handedly widened the definition of baptism and immersed people into the practice of charity. One of the things we learned almost immediately when we became members of the parish was we could never go to church without bringing food to donate to the food pantry. Well, we could, but we didn't and we wouldn't. Each Sunday, large baskets filled to the brim with food were carried to the altar as part of the offertory procession, along with the bread and wine. The donations and the bread and wine were intimately connected. We were a blessed and broken community, and thus obliged to share. But like lots of things, all good things come to an end, at least for me. The church wasn't moving anytime soon towards the ordination of women, and even the Vincentians, who seemed to pride themselves on being open to the wind of the Spirit, would not and could not budge on anything that might antagonize the Archdiocese. The breaking point for me occurred when the Eucharistic ministers were no longer permitted to break bread at the altar with the priest, something they had done for 20 years or more, because it detracted from the sacral power of the priest. In order to remain faithful and obedient, the priest sacrificed the spirit that had been provided by Bud, who had dared to dream dreams that no one else could dream. Unfortunately, the parish is not what it once was, but those charitable organizations that I mentioned to you have gathered steam and are huge, huge organizations that spread a lot of good things throughout the community in that section of Philadelphia. So by the time all that happened with the breaking of the bread and wine, I was in the seminary at the Lutheran Theological Seminary of Philadelphia, where about 30% of the students, both male and female, were former Catholics. Because of course, God does not show partiality, as our second reading states so plainly, only people do. And just as a quick example, the current rector of the Episcopal Cathedral in Philadelphia is a woman and a former Catholic. So anyway, Maria Marlowe is here today. We began worshiping in an alternative community in 2005. And guess who else showed up? Bud and Cass, the Bud, as I used to call him. And other people showed up. Mary Lefevre, I'm glad you got back on. Mary Lefevre showed up. Mary Rose Smith, one of our readers. Peg and Jerry Devine. Charlotte, did I leave anybody out? I was trying to think of the Hollywood Squares and there were other people, but I don't think they've come along with us. Unfortunately, that community didn't last for all sorts of reasons, and we reformed as the community of St. Mary Magdalene in 2007. And then the rest of you started showing up over the course of the years. And here we are, by the grace of a loving God who knows no boundaries, a community that has attracted folks from all over the US and parts of Europe. So I kind of think that Bud's vision is the gift that just kept on giving. And I truly believe that we at St. Mary Magdalene carry on Bud's legacy by our charitable giving. And Ed, where's Ed? Wave your hand, Ed. Ed has picked up Bud's mantle and he has run with it. And I know when I get a call from a 484 number, it's from Ed. And I know that he has found someone or some group that needs our help. And all of the rest of you give from the goodness of your heart. So I thought for a long time that baptism really doesn't so much save us as it empowers us to do the work of God here on earth, just as Jesus did. If you read the story of Jesus's baptism in the four Gospels, you sort of get different ideas about Jesus and what he might have thought he was about to do. In Mark, the earliest gospel that we read today, he is clearly commissioned at his baptism, and not from birth or from beyond, because Mark doesn't know anything about that. The infancy and divinity stories, they come later, years after Jesus died. In Mark, it seems as if Jesus knew that things were not working the way they should, and he felt that he had to try and set things right. He and not anyone else saw and heard God declare him as a beloved child in whom the divine was well pleased. We were taught to believe that everyone heard God speak and saw the dove, because that solidified Jesus's position in the later church. But most of the contemporaries of Jesus chose not to follow him, which was a source of anger in the early church. But the important thing in this story is that Jesus listened to the God within him, and he allowed the Spirit to move him. And it is Jesus's understanding of his own call that has made all the difference to us. He had indeed come to heal the brokenhearted, to free the oppressed, to feed the hungry, and to set captives free, because apparently the people of the time weren't doing that. So if we look around all of us who are seated here today, we know that the appearance of the Spirit was not and never has been a solo act. Bud and his successor, Ed, and all of us sitting here are prime examples of the largesse of the Spirit, which is available to everyone, pressed down and overflowing into our laps. Many of us have experienced a similar manifestation of God, an epiphany, if you will, and we have accomplished all sorts of things. If you recall, Jesus told his followers that they would go on to do bigger and better things that he did, something that is often not mentioned in a traditional church. And sometimes we followers of Jesus just have to listen to God, reinvent ourselves, and then courageously move to something new and different in order to follow his command. So how do we listen to that voice? The words that you hear from God, or you may hear from God, probably don't come from the heights of heaven. The prophet Elijah taught us how to listen to God. Elijah once went on a journey in search of that voice, and he thought the voice of God would be in a storm, but the voice of God was not in a storm. Then he thought it would be in the destructive power of an earthquake, but the voice of God was not in the destructive power of an earthquake. When Elijah finally heard the power and majesty of the divine, it was in the tiniest and faintest of whispers, more like a breath. But Elijah listened to that voice and went on to become one of Israel's greatest prophets. My friends, that voice talks to us all the time. Please remember to tune in.